Blue is the color. Football is the game. But how did it all come about? We'll be telling you all you need to know about this club in this narration. This is the entire history of Chelsea Football Club. The club was founded in 1905, which ironically makes them one of the relatively newer clubs in the Premier League. How did this club start? Well, by accident. On one fateful day in 1904, a man named Augustus Mears went to Fulham and bought the Stamford Bridge Athletic Stadium with the sole aim of turning it into a football stadium. So in this case, the stadium came before the club and not the club before the stadium. Anyway, Augustus Mears tried to lease the stadium to Fulham at first, but they turned it down. So instead of letting it go to waste, he decided to go ahead and start his own football club, which would use the stadium as their home ground. The name of the borough where the stadium is called Fulham. But seeing as there was already a club with that name, they decided to name the club after the adjacent borough, Chelsea. Ladies and gentlemen, that's how Chelsea FC was born. From the very beginning, Chelsea were known for making big signings, and that won them lots of fans very early on. They recorded the highest average attendance in English football in 10 different seasons. But Chelsea's history cannot be told without a man named Ted Drake. He had previously played for Arsenal, but he was hired to manage Chelsea in 1952, and he implemented a lot of changes. He removed the pensioners' crest, improved the youth team, made much better and wiser signings, and was able to win Chelsea their first ever trophy. Chelsea won the league title in 1955 for the very first time, which automatically meant that they qualified for the inaugural edition of the European Cup, the old name for the Champions League. But the Football League objected and Chelsea were persuaded to step down, so England had no representative for the first ever European Cup. Anyway, Chelsea would go on to win their first FA Cup in 1970 and their very first European trophy the following year. They beat Real Madrid to win the 1971 UEFA Cup Winners' Cup. So the 70s started well for Chelsea, but it ended horribly and ushered in an even more horrible 1980s. The club started a redevelopment of Stamford Bridge, and that set them back financially. This forced them to sell their star players, and they were eventually relegated from the first division. Things got even worse after that. They got close to losing their stadium and very nearly got relegated to the third division for the first time in their history. But they managed to escape both. They desperately needed a savior, and they got one in Matthew Hedin in the 90s. He became a director and gave the club a loan of £26 million, which they invested in new players. Now, Chelsea were one of the founding members of the Premier League in 1992, which felt like a new lease of life for them, but they weren't good yet. At least not until one-time Ballon d'Or winner Ruud Gullit was appointed as player manager in 1996. He brought in players from abroad and was able to lead Chelsea to FA Cup victory, their very first trophy since 1971. Gullit was then replaced by Gianluca Vialli, who won the League Cup, UEFA Cup Winners' Cup, and the UEFA Super Cup, and he also helped them secure a place in the Champions League. But in the 2000s, Chelsea were faced with another financial crisis. They needed a savior once again, and that came in Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich. The club was in £80 million of debt, and he immediately took responsibility for it, paying off some of their debt right away. Abramovich immediately started spending big in the transfer window. He spent over £100 million on players after his takeover of the club. But Claudio Ranieri, who was Chelsea's boss at the time, failed to deliver any trophies, so he was sacked. Do you know who replaced him? Sure you do. It was the special one, Jose Mourinho, and the life of the club never remained the same. Mourinho was fresh off doing the unthinkable by winning the Champions League with Porto in 2004. That same summer, Abramovich paid Porto £1.7 million to get Mourinho to move, and he became the first Portuguese manager in the history of the Premier League. Mourinho was backed up by Abramovich, who funded the signing of several players including Didier Drogba, Michael Essien, Ricardo Carvalho, and Paulo Ferreira. It was shortly after Jose was hired by Chelsea that he said, "I think I am a special one," in a press conference, and the media just ran with it. Indeed, Mourinho went on to prove that he is special, winning the Premier League in each of his first 2 seasons at the club. He also won an FA Cup and 2 League Cups. Mourinho elevated Chelsea to become one of the top clubs in Europe, and he set the foundation for future successes. In 2007, he was replaced by Avram Grant, who then went on to lead Chelsea to their first ever Champions League final, where they lost to Manchester United on penalties. But Chelsea kept going. It was just the early years of Abramovich's reign as club owner. But it was not hard to notice that a habit of making statement signing and sacking coaches if they failed to deliver trophies. He sacked Mourinho, Grant, Filippo, Scolari, and just kept sacking until Chelsea fans became very used to it. In 2009, Carlo Ancelotti was hired as coach, and he led them to their first ever domestic double of the Premier League and the FA Cup. That season, Chelsea scored 100 Premier League goals, becoming the first club to achieve that in the English top flight in 47 years. It was under Ancelotti that Chelsea made the infamous Fernando Torres signing for £50 million, which was a British record transfer at the time. As you know, that investment turned out to be a bad one. Anyway, in 2011, Ancelotti was sacked and replaced by Andre Villas-Boas. Chelsea paid Porto a record €15 million to get the Portuguese to move to Stamford Bridge. Abramovich was hoping he could repeat the Mourinho's formula, but it turned out to be a huge failure. Andre Villas-Boas infamously left Lampard, Essien, and Ashley Cole on the bench for a Champions League knockout game against Napoli and ended up losing 3-1. Then, a few days later, he lost to West Brom, so he was sacked. His assistant, Roberto Di Matteo, took over as interim caretaker manager and was able to pull off a comeback against Napoli and ultimately led Chelsea to the final. Chelsea played the final of the 2012 Champions League against Bayern Munich right in Bayern home, and they very nearly lost. But Drogba scored a very late equalizer in normal time to force extra time. In extra time, Peter Cech made a huge penalty save to keep things at 1-1 and take the game to penalties, where Chelsea defeated the Germans to claim their first ever Champions League title. With this, Chelsea became the first London club to ever win the UEFA Champions League, and as expected, Di Matteo was made permanent head coach that summer. You would think that winning the Champions League and the FA Cup would buy Di Matteo enough time at the club, but Abramovich didn't care about that. After he lost a Champions League game to Juventus, which pretty much knocked Chelsea out of the competition, Roberto Di Matteo was sacked. His reign as permanent manager lasted only 8 months. He was replaced by Rafa Benitez, who went on to lead Chelsea to Europa League success in 2013. Now, since the 2013 Europa League final was played before the Champions League final, Chelsea became the only club in football history to be holders of both the Champions League and the Europa League at the same time. Anyway, in 2013, Benitez was sacked, and that allowed Mourinho to return. It was another successful stint in charge for the special one, as he led Chelsea to the domestic double of the Premier League and the League Cup in 2015, but the sacking continued. Mourinho was sacked halfway into the 2015-16 season, and then Antonio Conte came and took over ahead of the 2016-17 season. In the Italian's first season in charge, he won the Premier League and became only the second coach to beat Pep Guardiola to a league title. He also reached the FA Cup final that year, but he lost to Arsenal. However, he came back the next season to win the FA Cup, beating Manchester United in the final. But despite finishing the season with a trophy, Conte was sacked after he finished 5th in the Premier League table and failed to qualify for the Champions League. Abramovich showed absolutely no mercy. Conte was replaced with Maurizio Sarri, who helped Chelsea win the Europa League, beating Arsenal in the final. He also led them to the League Cup final that season, but they lost on penalties to Manchester City. It was that game where Sarri nearly lost his mind on the touchline after Kepa refused to come off. Anyway, Sarri's reign at Chelsea lasted only 1 year, but for once, it wasn't because he was sacked. According to the gaffer, he wanted to be closer to his elderly parents in Italy, so he opted to move back and take the Juventus job. Sarri was then replaced by former player and one of the biggest club legends, Frank Lampard. This made him the first English manager to coach Chelsea in over 20 years. When Lampard took over, Chelsea had a transfer ban, so it forced him to trust the club academy. He gave debut to Mason Mount, Bill Gilmore, Mark Guery, Ian Matson, Timo Anduri, Tarek Lamptey, Armando Broja, and current team captain Reece James. With this very young squad, Lampard managed to secure a top 4 finish and led the team to the FA Cup final, which they lost to Arsenal. By the summer of 2020, the transfer ban had been lifted, and that allowed Chelsea to go back to their tradition of signing loads of players. They went on to spend big on guys like Kai Havertz, Timo Werner, Ben Chilwell, Hakim Ziyech, and Eduardo Mendy. But they were worse off with the signings under Lampard. Although Chelsea was sitting at the top of their Champions League group, they were languishing in 9th place in the Premier League, which led to Lampard being sacked halfway into the season. Anyway, Lampard was replaced with Thomas Tuchel, who was able to lead Chelsea to the FA Cup final and the Champions League final. He lost the FA Cup final to Leicester City, but managed to beat Manchester City to help Chelsea win their 2nd Champions League trophy. They went on to win the UEFA Super Cup and the FIFA Club World Cup. After that Champions League success, Chelsea wanted to compete in the Premier League again, so they went out and broke the bank for Romelu Lukaku, but it turned out to be a horrible signing. But that was not even the worst thing to happen to Chelsea in the 2021-22 season. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in early 2022, many Western governments, including that of the UK, leveled financial sanctions on Russian oligarchies. This forced Abramovich to put Chelsea up for sale. But as a parting gift, he wrote off the £1.5 billion debt that was owed to him by the club. Abramovich also pledged to donate the proceeds from the sale of the club to victims of the ongoing war in Ukraine, and he was reportedly involved in brokering a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. In May 2022, Luko, a group consisting of Todd Burley, Clear Lake Capital, Mark Walter, and Hans-Jörg Wyss, completed a £4.25 billion takeover of Chelsea. This meant that Roman Abramovich's reign as their owner was finally over after 19 hugely successful years. Todd Boehly became chairman of the club, and that led to a couple of top guns at Chelsea leaving. Sporting director Marina Granovskaya and technical and performance advisor Petr Cech both left. Then, months after losing 2 cups final to Liverpool, Tuchel was sacked and replaced with Graham Potter. This was the beginning of the bad times for Chelsea. After a run of just 5 wins in 27 games, Graham Potter himself was sacked in April 2023, which allowed Lampard to return as caretaker manager. Things didn't get better under Lampard. But Lampard only managed to win 1 out of 11 games, which meant that he had a 9% win rate, the worst in Chelsea history among managers who were in charge for 3 games or more. That season, Chelsea finished 12th in the Premier League table, the first time they finished in the bottom half of the table in 27 years. Lampard was let go that summer and replaced by Mauricio Pochettino. Pochettino led Chelsea to the League Cup final but lost to Liverpool. He then managed his 6th position finish in the Premier League which could only guarantee Europa Conference League football the following season. Pochettino ended the season much better than it started, and most fans thought he would stay, but he and the sporting director failed to agree on how the young squad should be managed, so he decided to leave. This allowed Chelsea to sign Enzo Maresca to take over as head coach ahead of the 2024-25 season. Under his new ownership, Chelsea have been spending extravagantly. Yes, Chelsea have always been known to spend big in the transfer window, but this time it feels like money is just being thrown at any player who cares to join the club. Under Maresca, Chelsea signed Cole Palmer for €40 million, Pedro Neto for €60 million, Christopher Nkunku for €60 million, Romelu Lavia for €62 million, Mikhailo Modric for €70 million, Wesley Fofana for €80 million, Moise Caicedo for €116 million, and Enzo Fernandez for an English record fee of €121 million, among others. In just a little over 2 years under the new ownership, Chelsea has spent close to €1.5 billion on players, leaving them with an overpopulated squad of over 40 players. But with success still looking very close, Chelsea were able to finish in the Champions League brackets and also got a Conference League trophy under Enzo Maresca's first season. Chelsea fortune seems to be looking up again, but will they return back to their glory days under Enzo Maresca? This is just the beginning of another period for a coach who does not know what the future lies for him. This is the story of Chelsea Football Club.